Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our Erster webinar. We're really excited. We have so many people on the call. This is fabulous. I'm really excited about who we have presenting today. We have Jess Segovia. And Jess Segovia, of ADA Guru, has spent his career creating innovative public transit and human services transportation programs and services. Jess has a unique background in transportation, having worked for an ADA paratransit agency, a fixed route bus and rail agency, a municipality, and as a consultant. He now travels the country sharing his philosophy of embracing the spirit of the ADA and assisting transit agencies of all sizes in enhancing the quality and safety of their services. That's the bio. I just wanted to add my own personal experience. I signed up for an ADA Guru presentation, a webinar, a training, and I was just so impressed. I have been in the business for a long time now. I've been to so many ADA presentations where you're given the high level rules, regulations, but so few presentations have provided the boots on the ground, realistic solutions to the problems that you all face. And that's what I experienced through Jess's training that I received. And I was very, very impressed. So I reached out to him to see if he would be willing to help Erster get the message out to help everyone with the ADA challenges that you face. So I'd like to now present Jess Segovia. Thank you so much for joining us, Jess.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for that introduction. Perhaps the best introduction ever. So that's a tall tale. I've been a lot of places around the country, but thank you very much. I do my very best to bring a real world perspective, right? I've been using a term lately in a lot of my trainings, using a common sense approach to ADA compliance. Does everyone need to be an ADA guru and memorize every single regulation, etc., in order to make the right decisions? And I think for the most part, 99% of the time, no, we don't. If we take this common sense approach, we focus on safety, we keep in mind the rights of our riders with disabilities, right? And so if we can ask ourselves something like, is what they're asking me to do unsafe? And does it contradict or otherwise somehow is it not in line with my operating policies? And if we're not sure to the answers of those things, that's why we have dispatch available to assist us and road supervisors, right? But if someone asks for assistance and they say, we think to ourselves, no, it's not unsafe to perhaps carry an extra grocery bag for them. We can talk about that as an accommodation or otherwise provide assistance. And I don't think my policies prevent me from providing this kind of assistance, then the ADA challenges us to very seriously consider providing it. And so I know we only have an hour together today. And so in thinking about all of the different topics within the ADA that I could share with all of you, I think general assistance requirements is perhaps the best bang for our buck with having such a short period of time. I do offer a number of webinars, and my ADA compliance webinar is about 5 hours long. And so how to squeeze that all into 1 hour, we probably can't do, but we can definitely cover some great material and have some discussion that'll be helpful to you all in the time that we have. And so I hope you can all see the presentation. I like to use this term, embracing the spirit of the ADA. Yes, we have our ADA regulations, and I know some agencies that take that very seriously, and they do not provide any type of assistance beyond the minimum requirements of the ADA. The agencies that appear to be drawn to me, or individuals, the work that I do are those that are always trying to understand the needs of their rider, the needs of their community, and how can we meet those needs while, of course, always complying with the ADA at a minimum. And so there are lots of things that we can do to provide assistance that would, by definition, be considered above and beyond the minimum requirements of the ADA. And even our latest ADA regulation from 2015, the request for modifications of policy regulation, That is even challenging us to consider modifying our policy and to go a little bit above and beyond when needed. I mean, we could even talk about the requirement for origin to destination and ADA paratransit, right? For decades, we were curb to curb service, and then origin to destination came. I like to use the term, I think it's a little more accurate perhaps in my work. I like to use the term beyond the curb service, right? Because we're not always going necessarily door to door. So beyond the curb, I think makes sense for a lot of agencies. And so we're always being challenged to understand, how can we go above and beyond? How can we meet the needs of our riders within our budget, within our available resources, and consistent with the culture of our agency? I also like to use the term culture of accessibility within our organization. Is our agency personality driven, or is it policy driven? How do you know the difference? Well, if your agency is policy driven, no matter if new management comes in or an executive director, etc., the delivery of service remains consistent. The culture of your agency is consistent. If your agency is personality driven, then when a new director, CEO, etc. comes in, everything starts to change, and service delivery perhaps becomes a little inconsistent. I've seen in many agencies that we would consider to be personality driven organizations. And I think in public transit, we don't want that. We want policy driven organizations. And so sometimes an agency might be personality driven when their policies are not well developed or well established, or there is no solid oversight program where we are ensuring that the service being delivered are consistent with our training and our policies. Those inconsistencies at a minimum lead to inconsistency in the services that we deliver, right? And that's, of course, something that we want to avoid as well. I also like to use the term accessibility versus ADA compliance. ADA compliance, I like to consider that to be sort of the floor. We have to provide at a minimum this level of service. But from an accessibility perspective, really the sky's the limit. And so if an agency takes that approach, we're not talking about service animals today, but I like to use an example from service animals where I know an agency whose service animal policy is animals are welcome. They don't even have a service animal policy. They allow all animals on board, and they focus on the issue of safety. Is the animal acting in an unsafe manner? That's an example, I would say, of going above and beyond the minimum requirements of the ADA, yet we are still focusing on safety and the needs of our rider. And so we have so many choices to make in the ADA. Yes, the regulations are provided to us. Some of them are very specific that we have to do it exactly like this or like that. But I would say half of the ADA is open to an agency's, not so much interpretation, but decisions, right? We can decide to follow the minimum or the definition of a wheelchair. 3 wheels, right? Battery operated, designed for people with mobility disabilities, etc. We can have that as our definition if we want to. However, we can also have an expanded definition. I know some agencies that will board a shopping cart from a grocery store, and they will secure it and move it on in service because their goal is to keep the wheels moving. And if it's not creating an unsafe situation, they don't see the harm. I also know a lot of agencies, of course, that would deny a shopping cart because they follow the definition of the ADA very closely, and it doesn't fit the definition, and it was not designed to assist a person with a disability using or having a mobility disability, right? So they'll deny that. That's an example of a choice. Both of these choices are correct. It depends on your community. It depends on the culture of your accessibility within your organization. And so please, at any time, share your experiences, ask questions, whatever your style is, type it into chat, unmute yourself and yell it out, raise your hand. It all works for me. I think the best opportunity for the time we have will be interactions and you sharing your experiences, asking your real world questions, right? I had a rider who wanted partial wheelchair securement. What should we do about that? Rarely am I going to tell you, you should do this. What I'm going to tell you instead is the regulations say this, and here are some things for you to consider. You need to decide what works best in your community. You know the tolerance for liability, right? Within your community, are you willing to do a little more to help your riders, but you might be accepting a little extra responsibility for that? A lot of agencies will do that, right? We have some things that we call, well, we can call them administrative burdens. We see a lot of these in paratransit. Do you send a particular vehicle to a rider, or you will not send that driver to a rider, or you will not share ride this person, right? These are all things that are considered to be administrative burdens. We could deny all of those things if we want to, but I would say that most of your agencies providing either paratransit or demand responsive dollar ride service, on-demand service, whatever we want to call it, I have a feeling you're probably providing some of those things as accommodations. And so I would suggest that you are embracing the spirit of the ADA by doing that. So if you hear something that doesn't seem to make sense, or you've heard a different interpretation or definition somewhere else, I would love to talk that through with you as well. And I think if we can do these things and get some of you to participate and share, then we'll definitely enjoy the time we have today. So we're always trying to gain a better understanding of the ADA, right? Again, I don't know that an approach to memorizing everything in the ADA is reasonable or realistic for a lot of transit professionals, but definitely embracing this concept of, all right, safety, and what does our policy say? And is this something that we're willing to do to help a rider or not, right? We're always looking for opportunities to improve our policies. How do we do that? Well, we need to make sure we have a very good oversight program. Are we observing service, right, ourselves and making observations? Are we asking ourselves, are they following our policy? What does our policy say about assisting walkers, right? People using walkers. What does our policy say about allowing someone on board with those folding carts, right? People carry their bags and stuff in. By definition, they are not mobility devices, but I have a feeling we are transporting them all day, every day on our vehicles. And so does our policy even address these types of issues? These are the types of questions that we want to be asking ourselves when we're in service, when we are observing. We want consistency. Of course, we want safety, right? I believe safety, consistency of solid policy and great service delivery and our commitment to high quality customer service. I believe that all of that does lead to safety as well as compliance. A little bit about me. Thank you again, Tracy, for the introduction. I have worked for a number of different types of agencies. The last handful of years, I've been back in consulting with my own company, ADA Guru, and traveling around leading in-person trainings. I just spent a couple weeks in Hawaii. That was a wonderful experience. I'll be working with DART in Dallas soon. The list goes on. And so if there's anything that I can do to support your efforts in your work, it would be a pleasure to do that as well. And I've even worked for a small city, City of Avondale. I think we had like 7 vehicles. So although several of my agencies are large urban operators, some of the largest in the country, and the complication of such large scale operations, it's helped me learn a lot. But I have spent significant time as well in a smaller environment where we have very limited resources, and we're just trying to figure out the best way to deliver services to as many people as we can, right? I understand that as well, and working with a lot of smaller agencies. Very quickly, reference materials. I will be posting in the chat links to the ADA regulations as well as links to the ADA circular. I love the ADA circular because it provides us sort of some insight into FTA staff's mind with regards to examples of things. You know, we have a lot of terms in the ADA that are not defined for us. Does anyone know a good definition of what providing a reasonable level of assistance is, or allowing adequate time for a person to board and exit our vehicle? I think we can come up with some solid definitions, but the ADA doesn't really provide that to us. But in the ADA circular, there is lots of examples of discussion and real world examples of things that they believe are reasonable and things that they do not believe to be reasonable. So some great resources. Very quick disclaimer, I am providing you my insight, my experience from years in our industry, but at no time am I trying to tell you what you should do within your organization. I'd love to support your organization if you need that, of course, but definitely I'm just trying to share my experiences. I mean, I've been through some crazy things. You know, I always say that public transit is the Wild West and anything can happen. And so we have to be prepared for that. And that's why policies, good policies that address the issues that we're dealing with are so important, because one of the worst things an agency can do is to be faced with an incident, an ADA related incident, and have no policies that actually address it. We have the ability to deny services to people with disabilities. If you don't have a section in your policies and in your rider's guide, or however you communicate your standard of service delivery, if you don't have that published to your riders, I'm not sure how you can go about denying services to them. We have to create an expectation, right, and educate them, and then we follow our policies. If we don't actually have policies on some of these very important issues, we're starting from scratch, right? And so I always like to use the example, if there's a person who, you know, again, public transit is the Wild West, anything can happen. There's a rider who is standing in a puddle of urine outside your vehicle wanting to board, and then they board and they get your vehicle dirty and you want to deny services. Well, if that has not been documented the first 2 times it happened, and then you go to document it the 3rd time, technically it only happened once because it was not documented the first few times, right? So we will review some information on general assistance requirements for assisting a variety of people with disabilities. And we do have different types of service. We have fixed route service. So that's our bus service. Even our light rail could be considered. And then we have our demand responsive service. That's really everything else. Paratransit, dial-a-ride, right? Taxi subsidy, all these new sexy services that are out there. We have mobility on demand, microtransit, whatever you want to call them. They kind of drive me crazy. But we have requirements that apply to every form of public transit service, no matter what. Of course, we know that the ADA was signed into law in 1990, and it was designed to establish a mandate to eliminate discrimination against people with disabilities. And so specific to public transportation, we have to have our policies, our procedures, our guidelines, etc., to ensure that we identify and then remove barriers that are facing people with disabilities. Barriers in public transit are things that prevent them from using our service. If we are not properly training and having oversight of our drivers, and our drivers are choosing not to provide boarding assistance, we are allowing a barrier to the use of our services by people with disabilities. I was on a bus one day observing a driver, and a person did not look disabled. We'll talk about people with hidden disabilities as well. A person who did not look disabled asked the driver, please kneel the bus and deploy the ramp. I'd like to board. And the driver is in a hurry. All drivers are in a hurry. And he says, oh, you're fine. Come on, hop up on here. That is potentially creating a barrier to the use of our services. We don't know, did that gentleman have a disability or not, a hidden disability? There are people with heart disease, right? Epilepsy. It could be very difficult for them to take a step up onto the bus. And so we can't make decisions based on how a person looks. And that's another part of my sort of common sense accessibility approach, common sense compliance approach. I think, and this is a message that I give all the staff that I work with, I think we need to consider that every single person we come across has a disability, whether we can see it or not. And then we create a standard for ourselves. If the person appears to be struggling or could benefit from our assistance, we offer it. And if someone asks us for assistance, we consider providing it as long as it is safe to do so. I think that type of approach could be very beneficial to all types of operations, large and small. We have a regulation here for non-discrimination. we shall not discriminate against people with disabilities in the provision of transportation. This applies to all forms of transportation, of course. Here's an example of discrimination that a lot of people don't think about, but it leads to a whole series of discussions when we think about the ADA, prohibiting against requiring the use of priority seating. Especially in fixed route, our fixed route vehicles have priority seating areas or disabled seating areas. We tend not to have those in our paratransit vehicles, our cutaways, etc., because in paratransit, everyone is disabled on our vehicles for the most part, right? And so we cannot require that a person with a disability sit in the disabled seating area. This is just one example of many where people with disabilities have choices. Where they sit on a vehicle, they get to choose in large part. Whether they accept a driver's assistance in boarding or exiting, etc., is a choice. Whether a rider wants to transfer out of their scooter onto a seat, which is safer for them to do because scooters, especially three-wheel scooters, are notorious for tipping over, right? That is a choice. The list goes on and on and on. Even in fixed route bus service, on our large traditional fixed route buses, a rider has a choice whether they accept lap and shoulder belts or not, right? That only applies to large fixed route buses because not everyone on the vehicle is required to wear a seatbelt, right? Yet in paratransit, for the most part on all of our vehicles, everyone is required to wear a seatbelt, and therefore the person in the wheelchair is also required to wear a seatbelt. So these are a number of examples of choices that riders actually get to make. And some of those choices are actually not as safe as they could be. Another one would be how a person in a wheelchair boards a vehicle. The ADA actually says that they get to decide the direction that they board. We may have a preference. We may want someone in a lift-equipped vehicle to board facing away from the vehicle, right? So that the majority of the weight is closer to the vehicle. But technically speaking, riders have lots of choices, and we need to do the best we can to accommodate and respect those. And we have lots of examples of other discriminatory practices. If we do not properly maintain our vehicles, our accessibility features, and there is a pattern or practice of those features failing, and therefore leading to the denial of service of people with disabilities, that can be considered to be a form of discrimination if it is negatively impacting the ability for people with disabilities to use our service, right? Not providing assistance. That's a big one. You know, a topic that's been coming up a lot lately, and I thought it was sort of kind of handled, we sort of understood it, but packages. I'm coming across a lot of agencies that are, for some reason, deciding to not allow the drivers to carry any packages for their riders. The ADA does allow that. The ADA does not require an agency to have a policy on packages, but they do say, the ADA does say, if you have a policy to allow the use of packages, then as an accommodation, let's just say your policy is to allow 2 grocery-sized bags, right? Then the ADA sort of suggests, by way of the reasonable modification of policy, maybe a 3rd bag would be reasonable as an added accommodation for the person to be able to use your services, right? And so again, choices. I think it's reasonable, frankly speaking, in my work, in my understanding of what we ask our drivers to do. I think it's reasonable because every agency should have a fit for duty requirement, right? Drivers are required to carry up to 50 pounds, up to 75 pounds. Many agencies require equipment to be manually deployed. If the ramp or lift is not properly functioning, you are required to manually deploy that. That takes some strength, some muscle. And so I think carrying 2 grocery-sized bags, I think that's reasonable. I don't think that's unsafe. And so that's my perspective. Again, I understand an agency that might not want to accommodate that. And so, speaking of accommodations, I don't think it's reasonable for a driver to carry a case of water on their shoulder. I think it would be reasonable to carry a gallon of water or a gallon of milk for an individual. So again, examples of choices that agencies make. The ADA tells us that we need to train personnel to be prepared to provide a reasonable level of assistance as part of their routine job. And so there is not in the ADA any specific guidance on how to train your staff. Let's just talk about drivers in particular. There's nothing specific about that. All the ADA says is we need to train them to be proficient in their work, right? So I define that as make sure that they are experts. I've come across agencies that have a training program that is half a day long. Training for half a day. The other half of the day is observing a driver in service. And then the next day, here are your keys. Good luck. I've also worked for an agency that has a driver training program that is 8 weeks long, right? And then everything in between. And so we just need to make sure that our training program ensures that we are meeting that requirement of training our staff to proficiency. Training our staff, our drivers, operators, so that they provide a reasonable level of assistance, right? We assist in fare handling. It mentions here providing some assistance with luggage or packages outside of your normal policy. If you have a policy against that, well, I guess you would not provide that as an accommodation. What is not an acceptable level of assistance? A reasonable level of assistance is a driver acting as a personal care attendant, and we'll talk more about that shortly. But we do not train our staff to be medical professionals, to administer medication, to make adjustments on oxygen tanks. I would suggest to you that these are things that we don't want our staff to do. And I continue to come across agencies that no longer train their staff on CPR, and the policy is when there's a medical emergency, pull over and call 911. And so I understand that decision as well. Using accessibility features, we need to make sure, so there are actually a number of things that we need to ensure are happening in our service. Number one, we are hiring people that can provide a reasonable level of assistance, right? And do the work of an operator. Number two, that we are training them properly to do their work, to provide a reasonable level of assistance. Number three, we are need to ensure that we are properly maintaining our vehicles, right? The accessibility features. Number four, we need to make sure that our drivers, operators are using the equipment that is there and must be made available to people with disabilities. If any of these things are not happening, then we likely have a weakness in our compliance program, in our accessibility program. And so I come across agencies that are very front heavy. They spend a lot of time and effort training their staff, very little oversight once they're in service. I know of agencies that don't put a lot of effort into driver training, or maybe they send them to pass training or something like that, but they put a lot of effort into the oversight, right? Watching them in service, providing direction, etc. So the ideal situation, of course, is both of those things, right? On the front end, the training, we've put the effort in, we have great policies, they work well in our community, they meet the needs of our riders. And then we have the oversight, especially oversight of contractors. I've been getting a lot of calls from agencies really struggling with contractors providing service on their behalf, because either they feel like they are overstepping their bounds in wanting to provide oversight of the contractors. This is specific to ADA compliance, or the contractor is making them feel like they shouldn't be here. You're paying us to do it, leave us alone. I don't think that's a reasonable interpretation at all. I think that we need to have a solid ADA compliance contractor oversight program. It needs to be in writing. It needs to be provided to the contractor. Contractor needs to understand all of the elements. They need to be providing at least quarterly data, ADA related data on equipment failures, right? We need solid determinations for ADA related complaints. They need to be investigated thoroughly. I would suggest from the city side, if I'm a city and I'm hiring a contractor, that I get final decision on whether a complaint has been officially closed or not. Do I agree with the determination? Was the video pulled? Was the operator interviewed, etc.? You can see the complaint process. I'm actually in the process of developing a ADA complaint investigation training, because there are a lot of pieces to this that we really need to do well, including how we categorize a complaint. I don't think we should ever categorize an ADA complaint as a single category because there are often multiple elements in that, right? It could be the operator misconduct. They were being rude. They did not offer securement when the rider asked for it. The driver refused it. That's like 3 issues in there. So to identify a single category, I think that's not respecting the importance of the data, because the data we get from complaints is so important. It can help us drive what issues we retrain on every year. I'm also going to suggest to you that you should have, at a minimum, an annual refresher trainings for ADA compliance. How do we know what to retrain on? Well, we look at our complaints and we see where our drivers are potentially having problems, right? This is how we develop a program like that. And so very important here, right? That operators make use of the equipment that is there. We need to make sure that they are using that equipment. Long list of accessibility features: lifts, ramps, lighting, securement area, of course, right? The securement system of the wheelchair is a completely different system than the securement system for the lap and shoulder belt. They are designed to do 2 different things, even though perhaps they share a space. We need to have policies addressing both of those things separately. We even have signage, etc. So all of these things are considered to be accessibility features. And we do have a regulation that tells us that we need to, when necessary, repair accessibility features promptly when they are out of order, right? But the ADA even tells us it does not prohibit isolated or temporary interruptions in service. So the ADA, the FTA understands there are mechanical failures. There are issues in service. But what the ADA does require of us is to, number 1, when we identify it, to report it immediately, to remove that vehicle out of service as soon as we are able, as is reasonable. I would suggest to you that for fixed route service, if a ramp breaks, and that's the only way a person in a wheelchair can board, that vehicle should be removed from service immediately, as quickly as possible. I mean, if there's only a couple more stops and then that vehicle is going out of service anyway, that's reasonable. Paratransit. If your vehicle lift breaks down on your cutaway halfway through the day, we have a few more decisions that we can make here. We can remove it from service, right? Replace it. But we can also control, because of the nature of paratransit, dial-a-ride, etc. We can also control what vehicles are dispatched to that vehicle, right? And so what kind of trips are dispatched to that vehicle. And so we can, of course, just simply not dispatch wheelchair trips to that vehicle. So as long as we are able to control that reasonably, I think we're good on that front. We need to have a system of regular and frequent maintenance checks. What do we call that in our vehicles? We are making sure that the vehicle is ready for operation in all of these important ways. What do we typically refer to as that process? Anyone have an answer for that? You can win some cool ADA guru stuff. Unmute yourself, type it into chat. What do we call the process of checking? This isn't, oh, you can't see it. An ADA guru coaster worth its weight in gold. Anyone? What do we do when we get to the vehicle every morning before we operate? Go ahead.
Preventive checks, preventive check, whatever you call it.
Yes. Very good. I see a couple responses here as well. The pre-trip inspection.
Pre-trip. Yeah, that's it. Pre-trip. Yeah.
Thank you. We also have post-trip inspection. Yes. So these are important elements, right? That we need to make sure that our equipment is working. And that's why I always encourage agencies to have maintenance available during pullout to make sure some things are quick and easy to address. And let's do that. Remember, a pattern or practice of inoperable lifts, ramps, or any accessibility features, these things can be barriers to service. If these things are either preventing a person with a disability from using your service or discouraging them from using your services, then these things can be seen as barriers and you might be out of compliance with these things, right? In fixed route service, we do have a requirement to provide alternative transportation if a bus cannot be boarded, say the wheelchair, or excuse me, say the ramp is not functioning properly, we need to dispatch alternative transportation if the next bus is more than 30 minutes away. So if you have service that runs hourly, if your ramp is broken on a bus, I mean, number one, let's remove it, replace it as soon as we can in service. But otherwise, we need to provide alternative transportation, however you choose to do that. Send another bus. Maybe road supervisor has an accessible minivan. Maybe your paratransit service can be sent out. Maybe have a contract with an accessible taxi service nearby. You know, you figure it out, but it needs to be done quickly, right? Definitely. We need to make sure when we are positioning vehicles, of course, that we are doing so safely, avoiding obstructions. Maybe we need to reposition the vehicle, right? It's preferable, of course, especially if you have ramp-equipped vehicles, to deploy onto the sidewalk. So that's very important as well. We do have in fixed route service requirements for stop announcements. These help really all people, but especially people who are visually impaired. So they have an audio cue that their stop is coming. And so we have that requirement for fixed route service. Priority boarding is an interesting topic. We have this often, or can have this in fixed route services. We can have a policy. I helped my agency develop a policy for priority boarding of customers using wheelchairs, because on a bus, right, we have side-facing flip-up seats in our traditional buses. Someone could sit in that seat, preventing the person in the wheelchair from getting a ride. And so we need to make sure that we provide that availability to them. So if we are having problems with the pass-up of customers in wheelchairs because the wheelchair securement area is constantly being taken by people who are not in wheelchairs, I think we want to do a little work to help address that issue, definitely. We don't really have priority seating in paratransit or in demand responsive service vehicles. The one thing we can do, though, is sort of control where people sit. If we know that we're boarding a person in a wheelchair, we don't want to let someone sit in the bench that would normally fold up. And so we can sort of handle that issue, right? Not necessarily tell someone where to sit, but it might be wise to fold that bench up if we know that we'll be boarding someone in a wheelchair soon. So, right. There's lots of things that we cannot require, including where a person sits, but we try to be reasonable, right? If we have a good program to educate our riders and to create a realistic expectation of the use of our services. I've been doing a lot of work lately on riders guides. Agencies, it's sort of an interesting challenge for agencies, because they'll contact me and they say, hey, we want to just rewrite our policy and procedure manual, ADA compliance. I even do the whole thing, but ADA compliance specific. And I'm like, okay, great. But we also, once we do that, then we're going to need to communicate all of these changes or enhancements to our riders. So it ends up being a two-step project. We update, or I create from scratch, the rider's guide. I did that for agencies in Gwinnett County, Georgia, Coast RTA in South Carolina. I'm about to do OCTA in Southern California, Orange County. I'm about to start working on their rider's guide. And so we do the policy procedure manual, and then we have to update the rider's guide as well. And so they go hand in hand, really. If we do one and not the other, we have some inaccurate information out there. We've lost consistency. All this great work we did on our policies, and now we have to update our trainings and everything as well, right? We must take the next step to the riders and communicate with them. Personal care attendants. They may always ride with the individual. We want riders with disabilities to have personal care attendants, because they are there to help with all of the things that we don't want to. We don't want to administer medication to someone, and we're not trained to do that. We don't want to help them if they're drooling or if they need some water or all of these things. This is not what we do. I was in Hawaii doing that training, and this complaint kept coming up where there was a rider in a wheelchair. The wheelchair did not have a posture belt, and so the rider kept sliding down in their seat. So by the time the bus arrived to pick them up, or even the paratransit van, the rider was so far down in their seat that there was no way to safely board them. And so the driver had to, because they didn't have a personal care attendant, sort of grab them and to lift them and to put them, reposition them in their wheelchair. Is that a reasonable level of assistance? By definition, no. Do we train our drivers to do that? No. Do we want them to lift the body weight of a rider to assist them? No. Liability issue, safety issue, right? However, as these drivers shared with me, what was their option when they're out in the middle of nowhere picking up this rider and there's no PCA? Was the option to leave them stranded there? They didn't think that was reasonable either. And, if you're familiar with Hawaiian culture and, they're just so, everyone is their brother and their sister, and they just feel obligated to help everyone when they can. And so it never entered their mind that they would deny services to that person, but they did want to know, what do we do about this? And so that's where communication can come in. If it's paratransit, well, we have their contact information, right? We can work off this issue behind the scenes. If it's fixed route, we probably don't have any contact information on them. And so we may be faced with this issue quite regularly. And, maybe we send a road dispatcher out there to try to help educate. But these are challenging issues. I mean, it is a regular occurrence that we are faced with something, and we either provide the assistance, even though we don't think it's reasonable for us to do it, it's not our job, or we leave them stranded wherever they are. And we don't want to do that either. And so that's what makes transit and some of these decisions very difficult, right? Although we benefit from the presence of a personal care attendant, and by the way, the personal care attendant is not there to do the driver's job. So if the driver is asked, the operator is asked to board the person in the wheelchair, even if there's a PCA, that is reasonable. That is our responsibility. We do it. We never let them, of course, secure the wheelchair. They are not trained to use our equipment. We provide wheelchair securement, right? But lots of other assistance, of course, that the PCA provides. And so we definitely, while we cannot require that a rider have a PCA, we definitely want to encourage their use. We have, Tourette's syndrome. There are some riders. I was actually part of a lawsuit where there was a rider that was disconnecting their seatbelt in transit, and they were trying to hold the transit agency accountable for that. We can't make sure that someone keeps their seatbelt on in transit. So, but a personal care attendant can. So maybe we want to encourage them to bring on a personal care attendant. So it's more complicated than that, though, on this particular issue. We have an ADA regulation, number 1, that says that we cannot require that a rider use a personal care attendant. We also have this requirement that states, or regulation that states, that we are to provide a reasonable level of assistance. And everyone agrees, FTA, ADA, we all agree that providing medical assistance is not reasonable. So there's a conflict in the ADA, because the ADA says we cannot require PCAs, yet we also have the direct threat denial of service regulation that says that we can deny services to someone creating an unsafe situation. There is the conflict. We cannot require a PCA. We can deny services to someone creating an unsafe situation that is potentially only remedied by a PCA, like disconnecting their seatbelt. Does that make sense? And so these are further complicated issues, right? As the deeper we dig in, the more we start coming across these conflicts. And so we have to do the best we can to help respect the rights of the rider, while also respect and ensure a safe environment for our riders and all of the other riders, right? Very important. There was an example of a issue in Northern California. I was doing a training in Redding, California. I'm going back there soon. And there was a rider who was quadriplegic in a wheelchair, and her head would fall over when the vehicle would turn, and her windpipe was being closed, and she was suffocating on the vehicle. And so the driver was frantic, of course, and would pull over and would straighten her head. And then, you okay? You're okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you. It happened 3 or 4 times on the trip. So they had to go to the family. This was in paratransit. And, listen, we have this safety issue. We need this issue remedied. One of the remedies would be a personal care attendant, right? To sit there, and when this happens, they straighten their head. They touch them. It's very personal to touch someone's head and face. We don't want drivers doing that. We don't train them to do that. What choice did the rider or the driver feel like that he had at that moment? So ultimately what the family did was not identify or send them with the PCA, but they ended up strapping their head. They attached a headrest and strapped their head to the headrest, and that prevented the issue. And so there are lots of solutions to issues, right? And it's really not up to us, the transit agency, to decide what the solution is. Even using that example of a rider who was disconnecting their seatbelt while in service, right? There's really only one solution to that. That is a personal care attendant. Unless any of you have another solution as to how we ensure that a person does not disconnect their seatbelt, we can't do things like lock them in. I know that there are these mechanisms you can buy on Amazon that prevents someone from disconnecting their seatbelt, but we can't do that in transit. So all we're left with is a personal care attendant, right? Yet we can't require that they bring one. So now we're stuck. So we can, make a recommendation. We can let them know there is this unsafe situation. The rider is disconnecting their seatbelt. We need to make sure that this issue is remedied before the rider resumes service. One suggestion is to travel with a personal care attendant. Personal care attendants are allowed to ride at no charge on ADA paratransit services, maybe even your fixed route if you allow that. So that's how we address an issue like that, right? We can't demand what the solution is. We simply must state in a reasonable way, in a respectful way, we have identified an unsafe situation and we need it to be remedied. Here are some possible solutions to that. And we go from there. That's really the extent of what we are able to do. Children may act as personal care attendants. I can't tell you at what age you should allow personal care attendants because it is a local decision. What I do encourage you to do is to not do what a lot of agencies that I've worked with do, which is 10 years ago, a couple managers sat around a table and decided 8 years old was a good age. That's not going to work, because if you are challenged on that and they ask you, how did you come to the age of 8 as a reasonable age to act as a personal care attendant? And you say, I don't know, we just thought it was a good age. You're not going to win that one, right? Instead, get some assistance from a disability organization that has, people with disabilities that have children. Maybe have a meeting with them and discuss the issue. At what age are you relying on your child to act as a personal care attendant for you? What forms of attendance, what form of assistance are they providing to you, right? Well, my 5-year-old child is giving me water when it's time to take my medication. That is a valid type of assistance. So for that particular agency, they're like, well, then I guess, minimum 5 years of age. So this is how we create policies like this that we can defend. Because if the FTA or someone sues you because they're saying you denied services to their child, acting as a personal care attendant, and I know this is an area that we worry about abuse, and we're worried they're just saying that the child is a personal care attendant because they want them to ride for free. I mean, I understand all of that. The ADA doesn't care about any of that stuff. If they have a valid reason for that child being a personal care attendant, all they have to do is share it with us, and that's it. We have to let them on board. And I know there are a number of examples of this type of abuse that we might be worried about, right? But if they tell us that the child assists them in these ways and it is considered to be reasonable, there's not a whole lot we can do about that. I mentioned to you that riders have choices. Here's the regulation that talks about a rider in the disability having the choice of whether boarding forward-facing or rear-facing on vehicles. They get to decide. We may have a preference. Our equipment manufacturer may tell us we want people to back, onto our lifts. But technically speaking, the regulations allow the rider to choose ultimately, right? They're considered to be in the best position to determine the direction of boarding if they are boarding themselves. Now, maybe we can suggest to them, if we are boarding them, we can suggest to them that we would like them to board the way that is our preference, right? Lap and shoulder belts, definitely, right? Every vehicle is required to have seat belts and shoulder harnesses as a part of the wheelchair securement area. And so again, in paratransit, where on vehicles really where everyone is required to wear a seatbelt, they are required. On our traditional fixed route buses, where for the most part no one is wearing a seatbelt except our operator, it is optional whether they use the lap and shoulder belt. But let's talk about wheelchair securement for a minute. On paratransit vehicles, again, where everyone is required to wear a seatbelt, wheelchair securement is also required. But on our large traditional fixed route buses, most agencies don't know this, wheelchair securement, the decision is up to the agency, whether you have mandatory wheelchair securement or optional. The vast majority of bus services are mandatory securement, probably from a liability perspective. But Los Angeles Metro, do you know that Metro every morning puts out over 2,000 buses into service? The scale of the service is monster. That service is optional. Wheelchair securement is optional. So what we would do is a person gets on board in their wheelchair, and then we would say something like, with your permission, I'm going to secure your wheelchair. It was more of a statement than a request or a question. And if there was no response, we would start securing. And if they would tell us, no, we're fine, we would not secure. 75% of people boarding in wheelchairs did not choose securement. And so that's an interesting stat. We have a question here. Are there really a large number of individuals that have been shown to abuse the PCA guideline? So, Alyssa, I would suggest to you that no, there are not a lot of proven incidences of abuse, but this tends to be one of these areas because for PCAs, they get to ride for free in paratransit, right? If you bring a companion, they pay the same fare as the rider, right? And so agencies are always focused, of course, on fare recovery. We need the fare, we need the fare. And so they do have significant concern that they are losing fare because PCAs are allowed to ride for free on paratransit. You get to decide in fixed route what your policy is. Some agencies allow them to ride for free. Some agencies will allow them to pay the reduced fare, and some charge the full fare. So for fixed route, you choose. But paratransit, PCAs ride for free. So I think it's more of a concern, Alyssa, than an actual, that we can actually prove that this person is not a PCA. And we want to charge them. However, there was a rider here in Southern California riding commuter rail. And, commuter rail one way was like $10 here. But they allowed PCAs to ride for free. So there was a gentleman with a disability who was selling his PCA status to people for $5 a ride. So it took a few years. They ended up tracking him down. They did a sting operation and they actually arrested him. So that is the only example that I could share with you of all of my work around the country. I mean, I've trained, honestly, tens of thousands of people, worked with hundreds of, maybe it's even approaching 1,000 agencies by now, and no one has ever really given me a concrete example that they caught someone. So that's why I say it's more of a fear, things that we're worried about. It's kind of like the service animal thing, right? We're more worried that this animal is not a service animal, that it's a pet. But all the regulation gives us is the ability to ask, is your animal a service animal required because of a disability? And all they have to say is yes. And then if we want to, we can ask, what task does it perform? And then they say, it notifies me of, keeps me safe. It notifies me if people get too close. That is a valid task. And we let them on board. So there are a handful of things where we are worried. Oh, another one on this particular topic is the number of service animals. We're always worried, oh my God, someone's going to try to bring 10 animals on board our vehicle. And everywhere I go, I ask, what's the largest number of service animals you have seen a rider bring? No one has ever said more than 2. And 95% of the people that respond say they've never seen more than 1. So this is another example of things that we're worried about that, frankly, almost never actually occurs. So I know we only have a couple more minutes. I want to address, we have a comment here. I would think that I would want to err on the side of caution. Yes, and the side of caution is respecting the rider with the disability, isn't it? If one person gets something for free and it means one person gets what they need, it would be worth it. So I'm just wondering if there is any evidence of people having it happen. And that's the thing. No one ever has the evidence. They just suspect or they don't trust. I'm sad to say a lot of people bring their prejudices into their work. And so they see someone, and if they're prejudiced against that person or whatever it might be, they bring it. And that's why we have to work very, very hard to make sure that our drivers, our staff that interact with our riders, are not making decisions based on opinion, based on prejudices, right? If you take my full training, and I have some webinars coming up the second week of May. If you take the training, we're going to talk in great depth about the decision-making process, that we must make decisions based on factual evidence, right? We must make objective decisions. We don't make decisions based on opinion. I think that wheelchair is too heavy to board our vehicle. I'm sorry, I can't help you today. That's no good. That's discrimination. I think your wheelchair might be a little heavy, but go ahead and get on the lift, and we're about to find out. And I've seen vehicles tilt. I've seen equipment squeal and like, oh, we need to shut that down, right? That's firsthand objective evidence. That's not opinion. And so I talk a lot about that process in my trainings. Sorry we don't have the time to get through that. Maybe the last thing I'll share with you is adequate vehicle boarding and disembarking. Here's one of those sort of undefined regulations for us. We must provide adequate time for a person with a disability to board and alight our vehicles. Find a seat. What does adequate time mean? Is adequate time 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes? We have to have a definition, I think, consistent with your idea here, Alyssa. We have to have a definition that it takes as long as it takes. We can offer assistance. Maybe it'll speed it up. Can I help you with your bag? Can I help you to your seat? Oh, you would like assistance to your seat? Great. How can I do that best? Take your bag. Would you like to grab my elbow? Right? Once they give us permission to help, then we need to ask, what's the best way that I can help you? That's how we're being thorough. That's how we ensure that we don't make decisions based on what we think they need. Because another thing the ADA tells us is that we must respect the differences among people with disabilities. What that means is that we don't treat everyone with disabilities the same. We don't treat everyone in a wheelchair the same. Everyone with a service animal the same. We identify they're disabled. We offer our assistance. If they accept it, we must ask. At least I strongly encourage you to ask, what's the best way that I can assist you? So that we don't assume. Okay. Let me just share, of course, that public transit is for everyone, right? I encourage you to embrace the spirit of the ADA. I encourage you to take my common sense compliance approach. Ask yourself, train your staff to ask themselves, is what they're asking me to do safe? And what does my policy say about it? And if my policy allows it, right? A big one that I get is there are people who are visually impaired. They miss their bus stop. They need help walking across the street to take the bus going back the other way. 99% of our agency's policies would not allow that because we don't want our drivers to leave the vehicle, right? Is that an accommodation? If we don't do it, are they going to be stranded? You see the complication of all of this, and that's why we need a basic approach to questioning ourselves. Is what they're asking me to do safe? I mean, I guess I could get hit crossing the street, but I'm pretty sure our policy doesn't allow this, but we are supposed to provide accommodations to riders when they need it. We need to call this one in, and we need to, that's why in my trainings, I encourage agencies to send dispatchers and road supervisors. They're supposed to be the ones that are called when we need help. Don't just train your drivers, train all of your staff. And if you can, train them together so we can have all of these conversations together. That's, I think, some great advice to give to all of you. So I'll take any questions that you have, of course. I do have some webinars coming up starting May 16th, I believe. ADA requirements, we go through 5 hours of all of these requirements and tons of real world examples. ADA paratransit eligibility, we talk through everything. Even if you have a paper process, I promise you will learn so much about the ways that you can enhance your application and enhance your professional verification document that you send to doctors. Even if you don't do in-person, there's a lot from the in-person process that we can learn from. I have a bus stop accessibility one coming up this Monday, actually. There's still room to secure or to register. And then advanced wheelchair securement strategies. I actually go into how wheelchairs and scooters are designed. And we look at what they have in common. And we talk about a wheelchair securement plan. We all need to have a plan that we are putting together in our head before the person boards. So that's a great one. And then, of course, if you are interested in learning how to enhance your policies and what kind of process you can follow to do that, the Creating Effective Policies training is a great one as well. And so with that, I turn that over to any of you for questions. I'd love to hear what you're challenged with. Anyone? Alyssa, thank you so much for your comments and feedback. Really appreciate that.
No, thank you. I was just, when you mentioned that, I figured it was really good to know, because if there was a huge dearth, then it's obvious. If you find somebody, you can say, yeah, that's a really good concern versus an overreaction. So
Yes, I mean, you know, the one thing we cannot do is overstep our bounds and to start questioning what a person with a disability is telling us that they need. It's very difficult to prove that they don't need what they're asking us for. And so if they're very clearly disabled and they have a personal care assistant with them, you know, do we really want to put our agency in jeopardy by, you know, well, what, you know, we can ask what type of assistance does the PCA provide? And then are we going to say, I don't believe you? I don't really think you need that. I mean, that looks so bad. Talk about just a lack of sensitivity as well. And so now if this is someone who maybe doesn't look disabled, right? They have a hidden disability. I mean, you know, even then we might be overstepping our bounds, but if we can do it respectfully, and you're interested in the wheelchair securement training, yes, go to adaguru.co. And then /workshops, and all of my trainings are there. All the webinars are there, and you can sign up. And again, I do stuff in person as well. I've yet to be invited to Utah, so I'd love to visit the beautiful state of Utah. My son's been wanting to visit there, so I'll bring him along as my assistant, and we can train your staff. You know, I do trainings, you know, usually groups of 10 up to 50 people if we're doing classroom, and we can even do onboard wheelchair securement training. We start making your drivers experts at securement, and the only way that happens is ongoing training with very clearly defined steps. We do it this way, in this order, every single time, and I provide that guidance for you as well. So
Jess, thank you so much for your time. That was a really important presentation, very engaging, and I'm hoping everybody learned something from that presentation. It's obvious we're going to have you back. There's so much more to discuss. I was really particularly interested in the new program that you're going to do with the ADA compliant investigation training.
Yes.
We'd love to have you come to one of our conferences. We have a conference coming up. We're trying to finalize the dates right now. It's either September or October of this year. So we'll be keeping in touch. So thank you so much for your time. And thanks everyone for attending. We really appreciate your support of URSTA. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I did put a link in there if you'd like to sign up for my newsletters. Just enter your name and email, whatever, I forget what it asks, and I send them out about weekly, and there's always ADA tips. I get calls and emails all the time from agencies, and so I put those questions in there, and then I provide my feedback as well. So I think it could be helpful to many of you. Even if you're in human service transportation, you know, I do a lot of training and support for nonprofit agencies as well. You're not transit agencies yet, you provide a transit service, and so that poses very unique challenges as well. So whatever I can do to help you all. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks again, Jess. Have a great day, everyone.
And I will post the link for the newsletter. I think someone just asked for that. There's the link for the newsletter. It goes through Constant Contact. All right. If anyone wants to, you know, talk on the side or email me, you can email me at info@adaguru.co. Thank you, everyone. And I'll even stay on the line if anyone wants to chat for a minute.
I have a question on for private transportation providers.
Yes.
As far as vehicles, do all vehicles need to be accessible? I mean, can you have a mixed fleet, or what is the current guideline on that?
Yeah, you can have inaccessible vehicles in your fleet. What you cannot do is use these inaccessible vehicles to attempt to provide service to people with disabilities, and it causes them to either be discouraged in using your service or they're unable to use your service. And so that is really the standard. So it's not having an inaccessible vehicle that's a problem. I mean, it is a problem in public transit, but for private operator, you just need to do a good job of ensuring that you're not sending it to a person with a disability who needs an accessible vehicle. Does that make sense?
Yes. And then as far as, I mean, you mentioned BCAs as on the private provider.
Yes.
Can we charge them for as a customer riding with you know, with their
Right.
whoever they're riding with?
Yeah, the regulations are pretty specific to ADA paratransit that it's free. And so if you wanted to, I think you can charge. But I want to suggest to you, so I mentioned that lawsuit that I was involved in. It actually was a lawsuit involving a private company. And this private company was charging a fare for PCAs. And so the rider disconnected their seatbelt and fell out of the wheelchair and got injured. And it turned out the reason that they did not send the PCA to prevent that was because they didn't want to pay the second fare. So you can charge a fare, but we have to be prepared for the consequences of some of these policy decisions. I would strongly encourage you not to charge a fare for personal care attendants, but that's just my, those are my issues.
All right. So one more question is, so when does the ADA apply to private providers?
The ADA applies to private providers in all of the general assistance requirements, like you must provide a reasonable level of assistance. That would include assisting in boarding and exiting. That would include securing their wheelchair, securing their lap and shoulder belts, helping them to and from the front door or whatever, right? These are what we consider to be general assistance requirements. If they have a couple packages and you have a package policy, you do that. But And that's pretty much most of what operators do anyway, in any form of transportation, right?
Yeah.
So that's
Okay.
important stuff. I mean, anything that gets them on and off your vehicle safely. And if you do provide service to the door or whatever, you need to do that safely as well. So that covers a lot of different things. But also what applies here is that you do not have to provide an unreasonable level of assistance, which means unless you offer this as a special service, like as a non-emergency medical transportation company, there are some of them that go way above and beyond. But if yours is just basic curb to curb or door to door service, this is the level of assistance that you need to provide. You don't have to do what a nurse would do, inject them with medication, lift them in their seat. Like, you don't have to do those things, but often we do them because we want this rider. We don't want to just sit here. What are we going to do? Deny them service? And that's what makes it difficult when we decide to provide a little extra assistance or not.
Okay. All right. Hey, thank you very much. I'll be in contact at some point. Thanks.
Okay, cool. No, my pleasure. Thank you. Anyone else? Questions? All right. Well, thank you everyone so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care.